like that. My name is Manashi. If you don't know me, I am a photo consultant and a photo rep. As a photo rep, I um, I have a all-female roster that I work with to promote their work and elevate them in the industry, as well as work on their marketing um, and estimating and that kind of thing. So I just have that up right now so that you'll be surprised at who was drawn this week. So that's my website. And as a photo consultant, I help all photographers with, commercial photographers specifically, with marketing and portfolios, specifically like an online and print portfolio, curating images and putting it together to best tell the story of who a photographer is and what their brand is and what their style and what they're all about, basically. So that's what I do. And I've decided that I wanted to do these weekly portfolio reviews. So, because I know that a lot of people are home right now and probably working on the inner part of their businesses. So their portfolios and, infrastructure and stuff like that. So I wanted to do these to help not only the photographer who I'm reviewing, but also anybody who can get information that is relevant to what they're working on. Excuse me. So I'm going to be doing these, I don't know how long I'll be doing them, but I'm going to try to do one a week. And the way that you can submit your portfolio is that after our live stream each week, after this live stream, I will be posting on my Instagram profile, my consulting Instagram profile, another post, which will give you directions on how to submit, but you just say enter me. And if you haven't filled out the form yet on the link online, then you would do that as well. So let's see if I can see. Okay, so let's see who this week is going to be. I just have to find the window here. And please ask questions as we go along. Related to the review, but things will come up as we go along that will be relevant to all of you. So please ask your questions in the comments, or let me know anything that you might want me to go further into. So let's see here. This week we have Jeannie Leotaud Photography. I hope I'm saying that right. So Jeannie Leotaud Photography, hopefully you are here today. If you are, please let me know in the comments so that I know you're listening. And if you have any particular questions, I would love for you to participate and ask some questions so that you can get, oh, I do see you in the comments. Awesome. That's great. You are here. Perfect. So this is Jeannie's portfolio, online portfolio. It is a Squarespace portfolio. So I know a lot of you are using Squarespace, so I'm just going to drink some water. Okay, so when I first get here, the first impression that I have is I open it up and I see one image and a menu on the left. The menu is nice and simple and easy to navigate. I like Squarespace for that, because you are able to put together a really nice, kind of clean, minimal website, which for commercial purposes is especially great. Squarespace I find a little bit more geared towards consumer photographers, but I do think that you can create a great commercial website with their platform. So in this case, I'm not 100% which template she's using, but I land here and there's one image. In my opinion, I find this one image doesn't really tell me very much. I don't have a sense of what kind of photographer she is, what I'm kind of looking at. I wonder, is she a children's photographer, travel photographer, portrait photographer? I'm not certain what the niche is. And it doesn't necessarily need to speak to a niche right away, but I want to get, when I first get onto a page, I want to understand about the photographer, because you want to lead them into the next parts of your website. So you want them to want to click more. In this case, I would probably do either a slideshow that has a few more images to give me an idea, or a grid. We'll go, as we go further into her portfolios, we'll talk about maybe what would be perfect in her situation. Each photographer is going to be different, and what I would suggest for that photographer is going to be different. And I also feel like when you have an opening where it's a big image, the best kind of work for that style of landing page is, something that is emphasizing the vastness of the work. So landscape photography, architecture, anything, or, it could be lifestyle as well, but really when the image itself has impact. So if your work is more lifestyle like this, a grid would be more appropriate, I feel, or a slideshow. But I feel like I want the image to be a little bit smaller, partly because I find just that it's just a little too overwhelming. It takes over, and it's, a tight shot of a person's face, and I feel like it's just taking the screen over a little bit. Let's see. I also am not, for some reason, and like I said, every photographer, I'm going to do something and suggest something slightly different depending on the work, depending on, what you want to get across. But I feel like this particular size, I would feel like it, and I know sometimes with Squarespace templates, you can't do certain things, but I feel like just this size is a bit awkward. But it could just be right now, like this particular image and the feeling that I have with it. How's everybody doing there? I'm going to check in to see if there are any questions. Okay, no questions. Okay, so moving on, I go over to the menu, and she has her logo up here. It's nice, it's clean, it's minimal. Personally, I'm not a fan for commercial websites of a logo. I feel like a simple name, like just this bottom part, says it for me. First of all, it works better design-wise within a template. You can use it on the side, you can use it at the top, but also it tends to pull my eye a little bit too much. And with a commercial website, really the emphasis and the focus is all about imagery, and anything, it's, I know it's tempting to get fancy and to get creative and do things that are fun and different because of so much same, but really the idea is to be as straightforward as possible, as clean as possible, as simple as possible, and take everybody into your images and what the story of your images is. So the logo to me is a little distracting, but it doesn't totally take me out. So it's everybody's own brand. It also speaks a little bit more of a consumer world to me, just right off the bat. When we go into her work, I feel like there is a little bit of crossover happening between the consumer and the commercial world, which I know is a very common thing for a lot of photographers to be doing a little bit of both at the same time. And I know it's difficult to navigate how to best represent that on your website. So we'll kind of talk a little bit about that today. So when I go into her lifestyle section, it is basically her landing image is the lifestyle section. So we click through immediately into that section. I feel when I go through, like some of the images are stronger than others. And when I'm looking at everything overall, when an image doesn't, like this one, this one pulls me out. And I think one of the things that I wanted to mention is that when we're dealing with, so-called commercial work, I think the term commercial is very confusing for some people. Commercial work is work that has commercial applications. So meaning that it is they are profiting, and it's not end consumer portraits or weddings where they're not going to use the images for their business or for anything like that. There are some areas like, personal branding and things, small business, even some of those things that are a little bit in the in between place, and they're more kind of on the consumer side, even though they have commercial uses. So how you put your site together really is dependent on who you're trying to target. But the other thing is that when you do a commercial shoot, meaning a company like Famous Footwear here, I don't know if the shoot was for Famous Footwear or if it was something for something else. But a commercial shoot, I know it can be tempting to feel like you want to show that you've done commercial work. However, most commercial work that you would do is not something you want to put on your portfolio website, because what you're doing is very specifically for that brand. And when I look here, all I see is Famous Footwear. All I see is that. And what anybody else who's going to be hiring you would be looking more at the lifestyle component. So I'm more interested in what's going on down here. And this might have great applications for the company itself, but it doesn't necessarily need to be on your website. And I think that when you're putting together a commercial website, and there is a lot of, it's tempting to want to show how the images, who you've worked with and how the images have been used. And a good way to do that would be kind of to have a client section where you can talk about that, or in your bio. But showing it on your website as a shot is pulling me out as a viewer. Does that make sense to everybody? Let me just, where are we here? Cool. Hi, Danielle. Okay, so no questions right now. Cool. Okay, so when I go through, I feel like another thing that's happening is that there are a lot of different styles, and it's styles of shooting and styles of editing. And I know that sometimes you're limited by what you have access to, what you're shooting. Maybe you're just starting out. I don't know your personal situation, but I do feel like one of the goals that I would have in this particular situation is to really refine what that style is. And there's editing. Some of the editing is quite harsh, and some of it is more speaking to a more consumer brand, excuse me, consumer client. And I can see that sometimes, if I'm looking at this image and I'm looking at it from a commercial perspective, I feel like, the jewelry, the makeup, a lot of those things are throwing me off. It does feel a little bit more like it was an entrepreneur shoot or something like that, which is totally fine if that's what this photographer does. And I think that's one of the things, is getting into how to express who your ideal clients are. And having personal branding clients or family or anything like that is a perfectly acceptable perfectly acceptable approach to your business. I just question in this situation what your direction is. So I look through, and I mean, this is an awesome portrait. So I see there's some really great work in here, but I'm confused when I go through who the end client is. This image in particular, I'm not sure what it is. I'm not sure, what kind of client this would be for. And for me as a viewer, I'm wondering how it applies to me. So, and if you're looking for personal branding, it doesn't speak to that client. It also doesn't speak to a commercial client. Maybe it's an event, I'm not sure, but it does throw me. And I feel like really kind of even showing, if it's less work and you're trying to fill your portfolio, this kind of thing isn't helping it. I would take things like this out and just go with what you have that's really strong, to bring that forward. So this looks like it was maybe part of the other shoot. This to me feels more along the lines of like a commercial lifestyle shoot, although still seeing, the brand in here, it's throwing me a little bit, but focusing more on the lifestyle part, if that's the direction that you're going as far as lifestyle photography. And the other thing that I wanted to address is just when you're selecting imagery for your portfolio, I kind of talk about there being, a passive image and uh, um, what's the opposite of passive? I'm blanking right now. Um, not aggressive, but if somebody could help me out with that. But basically, having a passive image and a strong image. And a strong image is basically when you're selecting work, you want to have that boom factor every single time, where every image that you look at, I know immediately when I'm looking at it, why I'm looking at it. And I'm drawn in and I want to look at it more. And I want to understand, I understand immediately how it could be applied. I can see it in an ad. I can see it in, something. And, while Tony's Donuts might be able to use this image for something, I don't feel compelled by this image. It doesn't pull me in. I don't understand, where to look, like, and why. And, if there was a portrait of her or something, I feel like that would bring me in. And it doesn't always have to be a portrait. It's just that what is going on in the frame is making sense to me on a commercial level. Like, why am I looking at this? So this to me feels a little passive. It doesn't feel like it's putting itself forward in that way. So there's nothing, and when you're doing a shoot for a client, there are going to be images like that are more passive, but you don't necessarily want to put them on your website. They might have been for a commercial client, but they're not serving you by having them on your website. And I think this is a really good example of what I'm talking about with the editing styles. There's this, really intense editing style in this image, and then I go here and it's, more kind of natural but brighter. So I think, really refining your style, and that is going to look different for every photographer. Sometimes it's what their personal style is not in their editing. Maybe it's in their how they shoot. But I think some kind of consistency that can pull it all together and tell, where you recognize and say, oh, that's the style that you shoot. That's how you shoot. And I know sometimes it takes a while to kind of get to that point where you have developed your style. And I think that when you're crossing over from consumer to commercial, there gets to be a little bit of confusion, because in consumer work, there are a lot of filters, there are a lot of styles that kind of come and go. And with commercial, and I would even say in consumer, you really want to kind of get to a timeless place where an image can last that time, that, test of time, and that it looks, that's not always the case. Sometimes you want to have something where sometimes you want to have, a real impact and message with your imagery. But I do think that generally you want it to kind of be able to last and not look like it was shot. Like, this to me feels very like a consumer client. It feels like, the styles that a lot of consumer clients, or personal branding or something like that. It's a great image, but that's what it says to me. So, and I have to kind of also remind you that I am looking at these from a commercial perspective. So if the direction that you want to go is small business entrepreneurs, that kind of thing, then, this is great. This kind of image is great. But then I feel like that's what you need to focus on and bring that to the forefront, and not try to put in lifestyle. When I say lifestyle, I know that's a bit of a confusing term, but not this kind of lifestyle, but more commercial lifestyle, then do that really well and make that the focus of your website. Let me just check in on some comments and questions. Okay. Would you suggest images or the galleries have a title or the name of the subject or name of client? The name of the subject or the name of client. Okay, so I will talk about the galleries in a second. I think you're talking about in the menu. On the last video, I did talk about that a little bit, and I always use the menu as a directing point. I think, it's really tempting to name galleries after a project or to try to group things that way. If you're working on a commercial website, it's best to be as straightforward and clear with your labeling as possible so that they know I'm clicking on lifestyle right now, I'm clicking on headshots right now, I'm clicking on interiors. So from that perspective, this is great because it tells me what I'm going to be looking at when I go into them, and it's to be descriptive. I know a lot of people want to group their work by projects, and it gets very overwhelming if you're a viewer of a website, and especially if you're going there for a specific purpose, and you're like, I have no idea. This website isn't an example of that because she's got very clear labeling, but other websites where you have like so many groupings and so many different ways to access work, it gets confusing, and it also gets overwhelming. And what you want to be doing is getting people to look at your best work all the time, and if you lose them, they're gone, they're not going to stick around. So it's really important to keep everything as tight and concise as possible and not try to have too much on your website. I know you want to show that you can do a lot, but I think less is more most of the time. Does that answer your question? Active. Thank you, Jamie. That's the word I was looking for. Okay, Jeannie, the images with the harsher look are definitely some of my older work, so maybe it's time to remove those. Yeah, or even revisiting some of them potentially, because sometimes that's something that, especially I've been working with photographers where, I do look at some of their older work and I say, oh, that's really great. And then they go off and redo the retouching, that maybe the way that they've done it is outdated or something like that, and just revisit it. Sometimes that doesn't work because sometimes the clothing is pulling you out, or the makeup or something like that pulls you out of it. So, but I definitely think like having a consistent style of editing is beneficial for sure. But it's also the subject matter, kind of what you're shooting. In a lot of these, I feel like there are a lot of different directions, and I would bring it together. That doesn't mean, now lifestyle can be anything. You can shoot a lot of different things with lifestyle, but it's how you shoot it and how you bring it together that I think really strengthens it. Let's see. How do you feel about black and white images on commercial portfolios? That's Nina asks that. I really like black and white. I do think I tend to limit it when I'm editing work that has a lot of black and white, just because it doesn't end up being used a lot in the commercial world. And even if it does, you usually would provide or start off with the color version. So it would get converted to black and white if they're going to use it in that way down the line. However, some images are just great in black and white and they should be shown, and sometimes they end up in the creative section depending on if it's a creative piece of work. Sometimes, well, and portraits as well. A lot of portraits are going to be black and white because they look best that way, and I think it makes sense in a portrait gallery. So it really depends. I tend to not, if it's lifestyle, probably not so much. Does that answer your question, Nina? Okay. Jamie, would you suggest then putting those older images with different edits in a gallery on their own and newer stuff in another so that galleries are cohesive? No, I wouldn't. I would suggest either re-editing them or pulling them out altogether, because it doesn't help you to have anything on your website that's not, it's even if it's in a different section. Well, okay, so there are certain situations where that might make sense. So say, for example, somebody shoots portraits and they are, they have and a good example would be studio portraits and environmental portraits. And sometimes separating those can make sense because it makes, they speak to each other more and it makes the gallery more cohesive. So in situations like that, or sometimes I will, like with fashion, make a gallery that has a certain feel, and that everything kind of works together, and the colors and the tones and everything feels good as a collective, even if it wasn't shot all together. But I wouldn't suggest anything with an older style be incorporated into your website at all, because I don't think that's going to be serving the overall message. So I would just completely pull it or rework it if possible, but not on the website. And that, that goes for a lot of things, like with fashion, with architecture, with things where you can actually see that that this was shot a long time ago. A lot of things date themselves, and that's not your fault as a photographer, but it's not necessarily helping, because it's basically saying, I don't have new work, I'm showing you a lot of older work. So yeah, and again, I think, really having a solid edit on your portfolio, like sometimes I'm feeling like this feels more like a family shoot, but at the same time, does have a lifestyle vibe to it as well. And I go here, and this feels like a completely different style. It feels a lot more candid. It doesn't speak to me on a commercial level, and the editing and kind of, I mean, I know it's natural, and I do think that having natural, lifestyle is a good thing, but this one is kind of throwing me. There's a lot of different things happening, and I'm not sure where to look, although I do love dogs and shoots. So uh and again, really interesting work, but I don't understand the context in this gallery. I don't understand how these are all fitting together. So that's that. I also, one of the other things I want to talk about is image flow, and pagination is what I call it, is how it goes from one image to the next. And when I go from here to here, I'm like completely taken out. It's so jarring, and the transition doesn't work for me. So when you put your work together, you want it to flow together and tell a story. And when I talk about a story, I'm not talking about a literal story. I'm talking about the story that the images, kind of the pagination of it. So how one image leads to the next. And sometimes that can be color, sometimes it can be shape, sometimes it can be, textures, or that there's actually something happening. It can be humor. There are lots of different things that you can use to lead the viewer through your work. But when you pull somebody out, they're out. And and this is the first gallery on the portfolio. So if I go here and then I go here, whoops, I clicked too much. Then I go here, I am already lost. And you don't want to have that when somebody first goes to your website. You want to have really strong images right at the get-go so that they're pulled in to see more. And okay, so let's go through another gallery. So headshots. The term headshots to me is consumer. It's a more consumer language, and it's also a specific, it's like actors headshots and that kind of thing, which is totally fine. But again, if that's the focus, I would change this. And in your situation, Jeannie, I feel like if you're in a place where you're kind of getting like a mishmash of clients, and you're getting a little bit of consumer or commercial work, but you're doing also headshots, and that's totally fine. I would kind of when you're doing your website though, pick what your focus is going to be, because you're still going to get clients that are outside of what message you're sending. And this is something that I talk about a lot with my clients. And believe me, this is something that every photographer struggles with, is if I don't show certain work, I'm not going to get those clients. And that is not true. You will always get clients outside of what you are presenting. You will not get clients if you're not showing strong work. And so when I'm working with people, I'm always taking work out that is not serving. And sometimes it's good work. Sometimes we're taking work out that is actually good work. But if you're trying to be a fashion photographer and you're showing corporate portraits, it's not helpful. So it's really, really, no matter which direction you go here, I think really refining your message on getting clear on who your ideal client is. What kind of clients do you want to work with? Not what kind of clients are you getting, but what kind of clients do you want? And then shoot that work and fill your portfolio up with work that is speaking to those clients. Does that make sense? I'm going to do a little flip over and check in here. Okay, no more questions at the moment. If you have any, please speak up. So headshots, I would change that to portraits. If you want to stay in the commercial world, call it portraits, and take out some of the work that is more kind of headshotty. This is a great. This is a style that works really well for. This could speak to a consumer or a commercial client. It could be a business shoot. It could be small business. It could be large business, corporate. So this kind of style works. It feels more natural. It feels more current and modern. And then you go to this style, and this feels more consumer style. And again, it's the harsh edits, and a lot of the colors are intense as well. So I would refine this section and get it down to work that's more in line with the kind of clients that you want to be getting, and take out anything that isn't doing that. I feel like this could become a business portrait section, and that would be, a good direction for you to focus on is having business portraits. And then you can be working with a little bit of crossover. You can get some consumer clients, but get some commercial clients as well. So hopefully that is helpful. The interiors section. So with interiors, I feel like, usually, so I hesitate to say always, because it's never always. There's always going to be difference for every single photographer. But a lot of times interiors and architecture are kind of a very specific niche into themselves. And if you're going to be in that niche, then you kind of want to do it really well and focus on that, and probably, step away from some of the headshots. Although lifestyle often works, or portraits, or whatever you want to call this, but the lifestyle and interiors can work really nicely together as well. It just depends on the shooting style and kind of how it's all brought together. I feel like a lot of these interior shots, some of them are great. I think, pulling back and getting more of a sense of the space and that kind of thing. But then, I get pulled out with something like this, and maybe it was shot for a client in a very specific purpose, but I don't necessarily want to see it on your website. So I think either refine this section or develop it more if you want to go in an interior direction. But I feel like there's work in here that's not serving you. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the grandparent section, and I have a lot to say about this section. I think this is your strongest work. I'm most interested in the work in this gallery. I find, whoops, it's not loading. Oh, I think that page was like that, just so you know, there's one that's not loading properly. So this work to me is very interesting. However, I would not call it grandparents. I feel like grandparents when I look at it in this menu, makes me think of consumer portraits, and I'm thinking you're doing, you know, portraits for grandparents. I would actually, I would group this in more of a either take your work completely in this direction and, you know, do this, because this style is great and it tells a story. I'm compelled to look at the images. I find them interesting and dynamic. uh but that menu doesn't tell me. I think something that speaks to that this is a creative body of work, or it could even be called, you know, the grandparent series, or the grandparent project, or something like that. Or you could make like a creative section with, you know, the grandparent or grandparent project, or whatever you want to call it, underneath. But basically something letting people know that this is more creative work, or that it's portraits or something like that that you're exploring. uh, but this doesn't tell me. I also, you know, down here comes up your kind of artist statement, I guess. It's like a statement about the project and it talks about that, which is really interesting. But I would bring that somehow into the main navigation, because I think it gets lost over here. Uh, it doesn't have the same impact that I think it would have if you kind of introduce the whole project that way, which is, I think, a good way to do it for anybody who's looking to incorporate their creative work and wants to include some kind of write up about it, because oftentimes you want to give it context. You want people to know what they're looking at and why it's a series or a body of work. Because and I think this is something that a lot of photographers also are interested in, is, you know, having a creative section on your website. Is it important? Is it not important? And I think it is important. However, I will say that not every photographer should force a creative section, because when it's forced, it doesn't feel like it's creative. It doesn't feel authentic. And it again, everything on your website needs to be intentional. And if you're just putting it in there because you think you need to have a creative section, it's not a good reason to have it there. It should only be there for people who do like a lot of creative fine art, or, you know, project-based work where they're doing that. And what it does do is it allows people who are looking at your website for commercial purposes access to how you think creatively, what inspires you personally, all of that kind of thing. So it's really powerful to have a creative section on there if it makes sense for your work. But it doesn't necessarily, lost my train of thought. It doesn't, yeah, you don't necessarily need one, but they are very important. And when you do have one, you want it to either show, you can use it to show a different style of work that you do. Like, say, for example, I have a few photographers who shoot fashion and that kind of fashion and portraits, and yet they do this like completely different kind of documentary style of shooting for creative purposes. And it doesn't make sense as a portfolio, but it makes sense as their creative section, because it's basically a different way that people can access their work. Maybe there is a client that's looking for that style of work and they're like, oh, but you know, you shoot fashion and portraits. Well, here's an example of something different that you shoot. It's also just showing like the what you're inspired by, how you see the world, and the fact that you don't stop shooting. If you're only shooting, you know, as a living and to make money, that's great and that's fine. But passion shows a lot more. It shows that you're, you know, inspired by what you're doing and you bring a lot to the table creatively, and that you have a point of view. Is this helping? And does anyone have any questions? Let's see. You mentioned earlier that Squarespace felt consumer. What would you recommend is more professional? I won't say that Squarespace feels consumer. I just think it's more meant for consumer clients. But I've noticed that over the years, Squarespace has gotten a lot more. They've gotten a lot more savvy to how commercial photographers want to use their website. So while it's, I think, initially intended for more consumer photographers, a lot of photographers in general use Squarespace because it's easy to use, and it's affordable, and it looks really professional and clean. And so a lot of the photographers that I work with do have Squarespace as their platform. I love Photofolio. That's the other, I pretty much, usually use either Photofolio or Squarespace, and I'm not affiliated with either of them. So there's no reason for me to say that other than that I recommend them. Photofolio is specifically designed for commercial photographers. So it's set up already to kind of cater to their needs. It's set up so that, and the other thing that I like about it is the customizability. There's a lot of leeway to make a lot of custom changes, whereas Squarespace has a lot more limitations. You're kind of stuck to the template that you get, which sometimes is great because it'll work for what you're doing. But other times, if you want to get a little more complex or do something that's a little more dynamic, then you can't do that. And so it just depends what each photographer is needing. But Squarespace often does the job. So sorry. Okay, Jeannie, is there a magic number for the amount of hero images clients expect to see in a portfolio gallery? So every image on your website should be a hero image, ideally. And I usually say, and it depends if you have, 4 galleries as opposed to, or 2 galleries as opposed to, 6 galleries. It's going to depend. You don't want to overwhelm your website. You want to have a tight, clean edit. So there's no magic number. I do kind of say like 30, no more than 30 images a gallery, because you're going to lose people. The other thing that I will mention, and this is a great thing about Jeannie's site, is that she's got the show thumbnails option, which is always good to have that, the ability to toggle and be able to see the work as a grid and go back to looking at it as a single image. And as I mentioned on the last video that I did, what's front facing is going to depend on the work and the photographer and what they bring to the forefront. Like in this case, I actually kind of like seeing this as a grid because it gives me a sense of the project as a whole, and then I can click into each image. But sometimes you want the images to speak individually first and then look at it as a whole. But that's going to change. And then I also tend to prefer grids that are a little bit, this one's not too small, but a lot of them can be quite small and you lose the impact of the images. So I usually prefer 4 across is nice, but you can't really control that. I'm on a 17-inch monitor right now, so this is going to look different if I scale it down, and I'm on a smaller monitor. So that's how it would look more on a 20-inch monitor. That's the one thing with grids, is you can't control how somebody's going to view it because everybody's looking at it on a different size and a different device. So did that all make sense about the creative section? If anyone has any more questions about that, let me know. Let's go to Jeannie's about section. So the about section, as we mentioned, talked about last time, it's a little awkward to put together. I like the concise, simple bio that she has. This part, the headline, kind of is more speaking to a consumer world. It doesn't resonate for me looking at it from a commercial perspective. I get that it's something you want to draw attention to, but I feel like it's better put just down here in the regular bio. There's something like, I guess if you could think about it in terms of professional, like almost like a resume, like it's really, about being really straightforward and not having a lot of, things like this. This feels like more of a consumer way of engaging with the viewer. I would reduce the size of the photo and bring it down a little bit. And if there's a way to kind of make it, that the copy is over on the side and that the images maybe reduced down. And though, I don't know, horizontal image is a little awkward, or maybe if it's centered on the page a little bit more, I don't know, there's something that's visually, not working for me. But yeah, simple, straightforward for a bio. Contact page. It's great that you've got all of this stuff here. These are the vital pieces that you want. And as I mentioned before, a form is not ideal. So that's good that you don't have it. However, nothing is clickable and you want to have things that are clickable. Maybe this is a photo that you brought in because you didn't like what you could do within the Squarespace platform, but really it needs to serve the function of being able to click on it and contact somebody right away, like even the phone number, because if people are looking at on their device and they want to like click and call you right away, that needs to be able to happen. So links, make those links if you can. And then, a LinkedIn and an Instagram. I'll do a quick peek at the Instagram. So with your Instagram, again, like last time, I feel like I'm getting more of a sense of you as a photographer when I'm looking at this. I feel like the work has been a little more carefully selected, although there are still images in here that are pulling me out. But when I see a wedding in here, it really depends. Like, I don't want to say don't show wedding stuff on your site, because depending where you're at in your career, that might be what you need to do. You might need to be doing kind of all of these things, and that's fine. Generally, when you get to a certain point where you feel like you have, you want to go down the commercial route, that, and you are wanting to let the consumer stuff go, I would say definitely take it out or move it over to a new Instagram account. But generally, yeah. Okay, does anyone have any other questions about any of that? Any other questions about, any of these? I'm going to wrap it up in a few minutes. So I'll give you a few seconds to come up with some questions if you've got them. I will also just talk about how it works if you want to submit your portfolio for next week. I'm going to be doing another one next week, as well as any other, as well as weekly for the next little while, to help you guys all through this time where you're working on your portfolios and doing things from home right now. So submit your portfolios. I will be posting later today with another link another post today on my consulting Instagram profile. That I think it's photo consultant Monashi is the profile name. You can go there later. I'll have a post and you can submit, say, enter me online or print. I haven't done a print one yet, but if somebody ends up getting drawn that has a print one, you just have to have a video of it. So you'd be sending that to me by email or a link to a YouTube video or something like that that has your print portfolio on it, so I have something to review. So I can do that, print or online, and I will be drawing, weekly. And make sure you ask questions and come so that you can be here for yours. I will also keep them live, or not live, but I will keep the replay up so you can go and look at them later if you weren't able to make the time. I'm trying to stay consistent with an 11:30 time each week. This has been very insightful. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad that you found it helpful, Jeannie. Yeah, I'm glad that you were able to make it and that you found it helpful. So the other thing, what else? Yeah, no, that's it. I think I just want to, if you weren't here at the beginning, my name is Monashi. I'm a photo consultant and a photo rep, and I have a small all-female roster but I also work with photographers to help them with their marketing and their portfolios, portfolio curation and marketing material, as well as just consulting and helping them understand the industry.